3, 2.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the campus of OHIO University Chillicothe. I'm Dr. Dywayne Nicely, Dean of the campus. To my right is my esteemed colleague, Dr. Tony and Vinci, and we're here to discuss the devil all the time.
Absolutely. What brought us here, Dwayne? Why are we thinking about Donald Ray Pollock? Why are we thinking about this weird Gothic Netflix film in the first place?
Well, a couple years ago, we had some meetings. We always award alumni awards at our graduation recognition ceremony. And, you know, the conversation about Don Pollock came up, and he'd been awarded a Distinguished Alumni Award before. So we kind of just kicked around some ideas and then got to the scholarship, right? So we developed a scholarship, Donald Ray Pollock II scholarship that, you know, really piqued my interest. I wasn't, you know, very aware of Don Pollock to begin with. And then, you know, I figured I needed to know something about him as one of our alumni, right, as well. So went down to Wheatberry Books and bought all that they had on him. So, and now been a fan ever since.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, and thank you for inviting me here to talk. This is the way this is going to work, folks. Again, my name's Dr. Tony. I'm Vinci. I'm a literature, film, and writing professor here at OUC. And I'm going to talk about this film, Devil All the Time. I'm going to try to frame it for us, maybe ask some questions about it, maybe bring up some things that we did or didn't notice sort of first time through. And then Dr. Nicely and I are just going to sort of chat about what we thought was sort of really cool, really interesting, really important about the movie. And then after maybe 20, 30 minutes, we'll open up. If anyone has questions or comments out there, feel free to type them on in. We'd love to sort of bat around whatever ideas we have. So we'll start out really simply. I'm going to try to summarize the whole movie in a sentence, and I'm assuming that most of you have seen it. I sat there and I watched it, and it's a little over 2 hours long, which is kind of neat. Most of our movies now are pretty short, so I was really happy to know I'm going to be able to sit down, have a meal. Probably shouldn't have eaten a meal. Didn't have chicken livers. If you saw the movie, you sort of know why I feel weird about that.
Right.
And it was great because it was 2.5 hours of watching and then 2.5 hours of experiencing afterward. Just kind of like sitting down and thinking about it. And I tried to summarize the whole plot in one sentence, and this is what I got. I think this is a movie about a young boy who very much needs to bury his dog but isn't allowed to. So as a young man, as someone sort of fostering adult, finally gets to bury his dog. And the more I thought about that, I was like, oh my gosh, this really is, it's the entire movie. It's about, you know, this Appalachian culture, this Southern Ohio culture where sometimes we don't have the time or the opportunity or the tools to know how to bury, how to mourn, how to deal with, how to grapple with these overwhelming, sometimes traumas, but sometimes just overwhelming family occurrences, overwhelming events. And when you don't get to bury something, of course, you act out, you displace frustration, anger, sadness, and all these other ways. So the whole film, as we start talking about, you know, corrupt officials in the town, we start talking about everything from what might be sort of sex trafficking and wild, wild violence, that all might be because as a community, maybe we don't have the tools to bury the things we need to bury. And by bury, I don't mean get rid of, I mean to actually mourn, and with my own soul, my own hands, my own experiences, put to rest something, that ritual of burying something and knowing it's always there. So for me, that whole idea of this is about a kid who didn't get to bury his dog, and I love that moment. It gave me chills because the whole movie is so violent and so vibrant in a way, right? There's so much going on, and that very soft, beautiful scene, and the bones are almost bleached white of the dog, and there's something almost angelic, almost spiritual about what he's putting into the ground.
Purity too, yeah.
Yeah, I thought it was really, really beautiful. So I'm going to try, all of my comments tonight, I'm going to try to sort of pull back from that simple sentence. And if you saw the movie, you know that the plot is anything but simple. And I have some notes here. I'm going to try to help us sort of parse out. There's so many characters, so many generations, time periods, etc. But before we jump into all that, what did you appreciate most about the movie, Dwayne? What attacked your heart?
Well, as a reader of the book, I thought it was very respectful to the book, mostly true to the book. You know, of course, this movie would have to be 10 to 15 hours long to actually get all the details from this book. I really thought Arvin, Tom Holland, who played Arvin, did a great job. You know, a big deviation from Spider-Man. And I wasn't as, you know, it seems like Robert Pattinson's getting trashed out there. I didn't really feel that way. I thought he did, you know, a good job. He was definitely a slime ball. I felt that for sure.
I never want to look at a grown man put his fingers in his mouth ever again for any reason.
Right. Yeah.
It really bothered me.
And I think, you know, the themes, especially with, you know, really took me back as a kid. You know, I'm from West Virginia. You know, didn't grow up in a church exactly like that, but, you know, an old country church where I was there with my granny, my grandmother. That was our term of endearment for her, is granny, which is an Appalachian thing and an English thing too. If you watch some Downtown Abbey, or Downton Abbey, sorry. And then when my mom, and there's that kind of the music, the soundtrack, you know, I'm a music fan.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
The soundtrack really took me back, and especially with those gospel tunes that they had.
There's so much to talk about right there. So if I can just back up a little bit,
Sure.
let's talk about the world of this story. I think will really help. I'm going to be using this phrase, American Gothic. And if you've read any of the descriptions online, that's what everyone seems to be calling this movie. And I think when people hear Gothic, they think Frankenstein, Dracula, these European stories about monsters and castles. And well, America has its own Gothic. And it usually comes from, first and foremost, the woods. The American Gothic, instead of being stuck in castles and sort of these ancient edifices, we get the outside world. We get Appalachia. We get deep and deep and deep forests and all the life and the darkness and the beauty there, and all the terror that can sort of inspire. For example, if anyone's ever taken a walk around Chillicothe, in any of the woods around here, if it's noon and you see a deer, it's the most beautiful, sweet thing in the world. If it's 3 o'clock in the morning and you hear a deer break through a branch, you're terrified, you don't know what's gonna happen. I thought the film beautifully explores that Gothic potential. But the thing that the Gothic is really about ways. So that's sort of the Gothic world of this. But there's also more. Not only do we get the Appalachian woods, we get two wars, right? We get the specter of Vietnam coming, and then of course we get World War II and that sort of haunting legacies of that. We get that, in my mind, that haunting birthday shot. We get inside of houses. We get, what, 4 or 5 different houses inside, and each is totally different. And for me, thinking about just how the universe is created in this film, that birthday shot where it's almost like there's a table, there's a family, and then nothing but darkness. Like, it's almost like there weren't walls. It was almost like it was filmed in hell, right? But not a scary hell, not some deep, dark, everlasting pit, but almost like family's all that exists. In the whole galaxy, it's just about these small connections. I thought that was really neat. I loved Donald Ray Pollock's voiceover, especially, I'll point it out a couple times, but especially in the beginning, it just felt so sad. It was almost like God's real and he's really sad about everything right now. It's kind of how that voiceover worked for me, right? Like, there was always this menace coming. If you look at the way that the film was set up, he tells us the plot in the first 20 minutes. Here's so-and-so, they're gonna get married, she's gonna die, something horrible is gonna happen to him. And at first I was like, why are you telling me all this? Let me figure it out. But it was that menace of knowing this isn't gonna end well, and I'm going to have to sit here and watch. The last thing about just the Gothic world for me, besides corrupt authority, right? We had corrupt cops, corrupt preachers, was the camera sometimes. I'm going to talk a bit about cinematography later on. Sometimes the camera just stays. It didn't move. This wasn't some wild war film where the camera's bouncing around. It makes you feel like you're there. It was almost like, you know what? You want to understand Appalachia a little bit? Thinking about myself as a New Yorker, sit down, shut up and look, right? The camera just forced you to sort of take in. And the more you look, the more you see. And the more you feel like I'm actually there watching that sunset or in the woods. I thought that was really, really, really cool.
Yeah, it forced you to observe. It really did. And you mentioned with the voiceover with Don Pollock. I mean, I loved in the book, and it was, you know, verbatim with the title of the book and film, right? Where his dad fought the devil all the time, right? And that's the only mention you get of it, but it really sets up the story because it is that struggle, and really his father's struggle made all this happen.
Yeah. So let's actually talk about that. Notice we haven't really talked about characters yet until you mentioned the father. Maybe it's because we're a little afraid to. So let's try to get this straight. We get Roy and Helen. I think I'm going to be thinking about couples and families because that's kind of the way I tried to sort of frame this. So we get right. It's Roy and Helen, right? We get this preacher and his wife, and then we're kind of told she's going to die, and we understand that Roy is actually going to kill her so that he can resurrect her. That doesn't go well. Roy is going to end up being murdered by a couple pornographers. So already we're in some really dark territory, and they create Lenora, and it's like, oh, maybe her life. No, she's going to get raped and abused by a preacher and then hang herself in a barn.
Right.
That's half the family, right? And then we're going to get Alvin's parents. Charlotte, who of course ends up getting cancer. Charlotte seems to be one of the sweet people in the film, right? One of these sort of shining lights that you might sort of go to for safety and comfort. And then Willard, who of course has these flashbacks of being in the war, these wild crucifixion scenes. Like I almost have chills sort of remembering these moments. And somebody's just...
That's when you regretted having a meal.
Yeah, exactly. I literally had food on the table and I was sort of pushing it away. Hometown hibachi, if anyone's interested. Right? And sorry, Chillicothe staple. And pushing it away. And what I think is really interesting is all of this, these two families, Lenore, of course, Charlotte, of course, is going to die of cancer. And then Jack, we can't forget Jack, the dog, who's also going to get sacrificed, similar to Helen does. So if you're confused, if this is a little too chaotic, this is the film, right? The film is sort of spread all over the place. And all of that, those two families focus, I think, right, on Alvin and Lenora. I thought that was just really cool. What did you think about the family dynamics? Did that seem authentic to you? Did that seem interesting? Was that weird?
No, I think it was pretty authentic to Appalachia, particularly where you have a grandmother close, right? You have neighbors close. You have neighbors, and that's not unique to Appalachia, but as far as like neighbors watching kids, but I mean, it was very authentic to me as far as the family dynamic and the closeness of the family. And really that, I don't know, it seems like us from Appalachia, we always have this longing if we move away to come back. Mm-hmm. So there was return to Appalachia, mm-hmm. right? In multiple instances with Willard and with Arvin as well when he came back. So yeah, I thought it was very, very respectful again and very true to Appalachian culture. And generally, well, I won't say generally, but sometimes I think when Appalachian culture is portrayed, right, it's not always done in a positive light.
Right.
And not that this movie's positive, right, as you mentioned, but as far as the family dynamic, I thought that was pretty accurate.
I want to mention something about that. As a scholar, as somebody who comes from upstate New York, and a lot of similarities. I come from a wildly traumatized background, a wildly poor background. I related to a lot of things in this movie regarding family and friends and school life. But that's not the point. I'm sorry. I don't mean to talk about me. But what I thought was interesting is a lot of times people only want positive things to be represented. And I think there's something awesome, brave, cool, honest. So when I watched the movie, I don't think I'm a sicko. I smiled because like, I'm glad someone's talking about this. And maybe, and we'll talk about tone in a second, maybe it's a little over the top. Maybe it's 15 degrees too hot, if you will. But sometimes maybe not. Sometimes you have to show something a little amped up on the screen to make it feel like what it actually felt like in real life. So I want to talk for a second about what I thought was one of the coolest sequences in the movie. This is gonna make me sound like a sicko. And that's the two violence montages where we get Willard kind of choosing the right time and place to beat the crap out of those guys that said rude things about his wife, right? I will say that I almost fell into the trap. The men are almost acting as though Charlotte is a prostitute, and they're saying, well, she's, warming the bed for me. And there's a couple scenes where Charlotte sort of is like, yeah, go stay out and get me sugar. And there's a suggestion in the film, at least, that it's possible that that is a reality, and Willard knows it, and he's performing that sort of revenge. But what I thought was really striking about that moment, he brings his son with him, right? And they park in the car, and the camera kind of stays with Alvin in the car a little bit, and you become the child, watching your dad beat the crap out of these guys who not just said rude things about your mom, you sort of get the sense there was a real threat there. That they, even not that words aren't enough of a threat, but that they could, if not create direct violence towards his wife, there was the sense of the world isn't safe when people talk like that all the time. The world, it's not safe for myself. It's not safe for my son. It's not safe for my family. It's not safe for my own self to have people talking that way about women, about sex, about my marriage bed, etc. So he takes a bath, right? And he sort of goes to town. And what got me was, one, you mentioned this, the soundtrack, no music in that scene. You just have to listen to what we call the diegetic sound, the sound from the world of the movie, which is horrifying. I hope that the people out there have not witnessed violence, but I'm sure many of you have. The noises seem to be what haunt us at night. The noise of what a boot sounds like in someone's head, something like that, it haunts. And then when Elvin comes back and says, the voiceover, something like, that was the best day I spent with my dad, or something like that, and you're like, am I supposed to laugh? Am I supposed to be horrified? So I want to know, did you laugh at that moment? Did you not at that moment?
No, well, I didn't laugh at that moment where Arvin said that was the best day of his life, but I did laugh at the moment where they talk about the multitude of son of a bitches out there, because that is in the book. And, Arvin, real quick, that more than 100, and, his dad gets a kick out of that. So that was, probably the one instance of humor you get in the movie. And that's something, I actually read this morning or yesterday. The days kind of go together with the pandemic, especially.
Absolutely.
But, Don Pollock mentioned that in an interview, it might have been with the Columbus Dispatch, that, there was more humor in the book, and he would hope that they would put some of that in there if he had a gripe, but otherwise he was pleased. But yeah, that was I did get a kick out of that, and that was a laugh out loud, literally, moment for me when I watched the movie. So.
Well, I'm so glad he mentions humor and that you bring it up, because one of the things that I think is successful about the film is I'm often not sure how to feel. So I mentioned that scene where, am I supposed to laugh at that line? I almost think the whole movie plays that way. Are we supposed to be sad at that? Are we supposed to laugh at that? Or if I did laugh and then it's really serious, am I horrible? I thought that was beautiful. And that's something that, again, the American Gothic does really well. It doesn't tell you how to think about the world. And it also, I think, doesn't judge you for how you respond. I teach 100 students a week, and we talk a lot about the history of America and American literature, and talk a lot about violence. We talk a lot about trauma. And I often tell my students, whatever you do, however you respond, bring it. The worst thing you can do is suppress, to hide, to judge yourself for how you feel. And I think the film doesn't judge itself for how it feels. Does that make sense? Like, I think the film is like, here's the life I want to portray, and you just have to deal with it. So my second comment about that is, sorry, for those of you out there, I can't think without a pen in my hand, and it's always purple.
Now he can't think.
You're right, exactly. My mind is gone. What I really thought was strange was when we watch the father get revenge, if you will, there's no music and we have to deal with all that sound. However, there's a long sequence where Elvin steps in his dad's footsteps and wants to defend Lenora against all these sort of creeps at school. Except this time, we get a fiddle playing in the background, and then we get, I forget the name of the song, but it felt like this really 50s crooner song, a sort of a sweet love song in the background. And if you know anything about cinema, when we see montages like this, they're fun. They're training montages. We can see a superhero find their outfit for the first time, or we can see somebody train, we can see Rocky training or whatever. And so the music was fun, and the way it was shot was fun, and he's going to beat the living crap one by one of these people. And at first I was like, oh, I know this scene. This is Spider-Man. Spider-Man is going to go get ready to solve crime. And then I was like, what the heck? And then when you look at who he's beating up, right, it's demonstrable that Elvin is poor, right? The people he's beating up seem to have money. They seem to be affluent. So this wasn't just about, hey, they said bad things about my sister, I'm going to show them. There were other rages. So when I was talking earlier about the film does a beautiful job of showing how people have a hard time negotiating or mourning or moving on from their sadness or their pain, it seemed to be like, yeah, he's defending Lenora, but really this is about his own anger, perhaps, at his class, or at least his anger at why it is that rich people seem to be abusing his family, right? So each one of those blasts, if you will, there's more to it than just some weird, archaic sense of chivalry or defending someone's name, because even that could be seen as an actually potentially misogynistic act and potentially anti-woman act. So I'm going to defend you by beating up the men in your name. So maybe I didn't want violence in my name. Maybe I can handle myself. Thank you very much. So what did you think about those moments? Were those fun to watch? Did you feel like somebody was getting their comeuppance? Or is it just kind of horrifying to watch a young kid beat the crap out of his peers?
I never, even though I'm a boxing fan, I mean, as far as sport, I'm not a fan of violence. Never have been, as far as that goes. So, I even think of, back when we were in grade school and things, in middle school, people are like, fight, and then there's this crowd. And something I never really responded to that well, so it makes me uncomfortable, really does. And I knew by reading the book before the movie that these things were coming. So, that's interesting that you say that the song with Marvin beating up the guys, particularly when they were in the garage, right? It's upbeat. Yeah, I mean, he's listening to the radio, before he's doing that. So, not fun for me, but I think like you, it's well shot, as far as that goes. But I think maybe, the filmmakers are having fun shooting those type of things, and in the editing room, maybe what they're putting in the music.
Definitely with the editing, yeah. And again, I guess that's what I really liked about the movie is it really played with my feelings. It wasn't just, violence bad, violence gross. It was, no, there's something real and important about, because again, for me, it was, there's the unburied dog. There it was. You didn't bury the dogs, you got to beat the crap out of people at school, right? I'm going to come back to that as we get into the darker elements. Notice, for those of you who watched the film, we're like, they're still being pretty tame. They're talking about, some fights in school. What about that scene in that moment? What about the photographs of a naked woman and a dead dude? What about that? We'll get there. We're trying to warm up here. I need to drink a little more coffee before we can get to the real dark moments, but maybe this is a way to get there. My favorite shot of the film is of the crucifix that he makes in the backyard, right? And the idea of the cross is wildly important in this film. The first time we see it, of course, maybe I'm not exactly right about that, is we get the flashback of this Marine who seems to be crucified. And it almost seems like an apocalyptic scene. The coloring's gray, there's smoke filtering through the landscape, terrifying moment. And they encounter this man they have to sort of euthanize. And that seems to definitely haunt Willard, right? And that's something that I'm so glad to see in the film, not those particular images that I'm happy to see, but I'm glad to see the strange hauntings of war that I've not been to war. I've taught many vets, and I hope I garner their respect when I say, I'm listening. I can't pretend to understand. I don't want to pretend to understand. I'm going to let your voice sing here, and I'll do my best to understand, knowing I can't. And if there's a single idea I want to send out there, even if you're from some of the parts in the world where this movie it takes place, you can only understand so much, right? You understand your world, your environment, your experiences. The film, I think, really asks us to listen to them. And that flashback forced me to listen to, is it Bill Skarsgård who plays Willard? Yes. Pennywise there. It really forced me to listen to him and to watch him closely every time he was on screen, because I could see nothing but that crucified Marine every time I saw his face. And you could tell the way Bill plays it, he's not seeing anything but that either. Like, that's haunting him. So when he creates in his backyard this praying spot, this little altar,
you know where it's coming from.
Yeah.
You know what motivated it. Yeah.
And it's a beautiful, terrifying moment. And what I thought was gorgeous that the director did, and I'm sorry if I can't recall his name. I hope you'll forgive me, right? It's Wednesday, it's 6:30 at night. We've all been sort of...
Is it Campos? Is that the...
Yes, yeah. The way that shot is framed, the bottom, top, and sides of the cross go outside the screen. And if you think about when you see crosses on screen, 99% of the time, there's the crucifix, there's the cross, and there's something around it. In this shot, and it gets repeated at least 3 times throughout the film, sometimes at daylight, sometimes at night, the cross extends beyond the screen. And I thought that was a really smart way to say, first of all, if we're thinking about Willard's character, what he sees in this cross is way bigger than what you see in this cross. That the power of that extends beyond the shot. And then I don't think we can get out of this film without talking about the way certain interpretations of religion might work in certain places in Appalachia. And maybe this idea that it extends beyond the image. It extends beyond the way that crucifix sort of works. And my favorite shot of the whole movie was when it was at night. And it's when, I believe it's the night Charlotte dies, and they stay there all day. And there's that same exact shot. The camera goes to the same exact place. And outside of any religious point of view, it felt to me a way to say, if you're watching this film right now, it was #1 on Netflix last week. If you're watching this film
For
right
the
now,
weekend.
great.
Yes.
Chances are there's something bigger here that you can't see. Chances are this is a snippet. It's funny, some of my students from Appalachia said things like, I really liked the movie, it was cool, but everyone knows that. Everyone knows what's in that movie. And then I had friends from elsewhere saying, oh my gosh, all the stuff in that movie. And I loved that combination. I thought that was really, really neat. So as long as I've set this up, what was the most terrifying, striking, problematic, horrifying thing you were hoping I didn't ask about?
Well, I think I mean, it's early. It's definitely for me the scene of the soldier that Willard, I mean, executes. I mean, mercifully executes, right? But, and it is, I mean, Don Pollock's a very vivid writer, and that's one thing that I think people respond to him for. You really get lost. I mean, I do, particularly with reading his work. But I was not expecting that vision from the movie.
Again, so quickly.
Yeah, and a very close second, or 1A, is the crucified dog.
And I'm so glad that's a brief shot. Because again, I did pause it and I did go back. It's a shot that can look, it's so abnormal. It almost looks like Scooby-Doo on the cross, which, right, that could seem silly. That could seem, so I love that it's darkly lit and it's flashed enough to be horrifying. It's almost like you recognize it a moment after it comes on screen.
Right.
So I'll get a little technical here. Because they did it that way, the fact that your mind recognizes what you saw 2 seconds after your eyes did, that's what we call traumatic resonance. Traumatic memory seems to work that way. You're not living in this moment. Your mind is remembering something from somewhere else, but it superimposes it onto the sights and smells of now. So it's almost like you don't know where and when you are at times. And I thought the film did a beautiful, 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 wrong word perhaps, but a beautiful job of that. I think for me, if I'm looking for a horrifying moment, a moment I didn't want to watch, besides Robert Pattinson eating chicken livers with his first 2 fingers. I'm sorry if I get his name wrong, I always mispronounce it. Was the 1 and 1A, when Willard actually kills the dog. That, I think many of us get really sensitive to violence towards animals, right? What wounded me so much was, it's kind of like we knew what he thought he was doing. I'm going to argue this is a gross misinterpretation of the religion he thought he followed. I'll say that again. I think this is a gross misinterpretation of the religion he thought he followed, where he thought, if I do this horrible thing, then I'll get what I want from God. And from the son's point of view, right, there's no greater purpose in this. There's no sanctity in this. There's no sacred thing. You're actually killing my sacred thing. And I won't push this too far. I don't want to step too much in anyone's, really deeply held convictions. But of course, I'm very certain that Donald Ray Pollock understands the pun of dog and God, right? So when you're talking about a dog in literature or a dog in film, you're also probably talking about God. So when I was talking about having to bury one's dog, it's almost like I had to bury my dad's God. I had to bury the way my dad saw the cosmos, the universe, justice. I needed to put that to rest because it doesn't seem to be the world I want to live in exactly. So again, I hope I'm saying that respectfully. I know this is a very sensitive topic for a lot of folks, right? So that was one thing is watching that dog, watching good old Jack get hurt. But the other scene for me, honestly, that I had just such a hard time with, besides the spiders, who like spiders, right? Was Lee, actually. The moment when Lee, as a cop, is in the car with, I think, his girlfriend, and she's performing a sexual act on him, and there's no connectivity, no pleasure, no sense of anything in that scene other than power. And I'm sorry if I get a little crude here, but this is what happens in the film. He asks her after the sexual act is performed, did you get it all in the cup? And for me, it was like, okay, this film's going to go places I don't want to go. This film is going to talk about, because usually in culture, and as somebody who teaches literature, the one thing we're most sensitive about is bodily fluids. We really are. We want to be careful about bodily fluids. And the fact that the film within 20 minutes is like, well, let's talk about those. And then I was like, oh gosh, and I'm going to put my cup down now because I feel a little bit weird. But so we're going to open this up to questions and comments from anyone who might be out there watching. Make sure you just saved me. Let's do that. It's a half hour in. Instead of me going to Carl and Sandy and some of the darker elements of this film, we'll see if you folks want to bring them up at all. Are there any sort of questions or comments you'd either like to share and we'll read out loud, or anything you'd like Dwayne and I to maybe think about or think through?
Leslie says, but the story ends in kind of a limbo. Where is there justice or not? It's an interesting question why the woods are a place of horror in American Gothic.
It's a great, great comment. I wish I could respond quickly because I would ask, did you like that it ended like that? Did you like that it ended ambiguously? And I love that you bring up justice. I mean, a bunch of people get shot and killed, a bunch of people get beaten up. Is that justice, right? And I think you're exactly right that the horror of the woods are also, and you didn't say this, but the horror of the woods are also the peace of the woods. Like I was saying, right? It seems to me that the places that brought Alvin terror were the same places that brought him solace. Home, right? The woods. And I would argue what the film does nicely is the folks who are experiencing these traumatic realities, you're not going to separate home from terror, beauty from horror. And for those of us from challenging backgrounds or places, let's just face it, right? People are always saying things like, why do you go back to an abusive place? It's home. And I didn't see, it's not just abuse, it's love and it's connection and it's comfort and it's security and it's terror and welcome to my family. Like that's it. And I'm very appreciative of your comment. Was it Leslie?
That's correct.
I'm very appreciative of that comment because I think that is, the Gothic isn't trying to judge people. It's not trying to give us an easy answer. And I hope that we're honoring Pollock's work here by saying he resonates. He gives us something to think and feel with that lasts beyond the movie. It's almost like, what's the last line? It's something like he was just happy to have a ride or something like that. It's such a beautiful moment of, I'm happy that someone else can drive for a bit and I can maybe sort of sleep.
Yeah, and I think there really is no overall justice to this. It's not in the book and not in the movie, right? I mean, there's maybe pockets of justice in there, but I mean, when you really think about it, it's part of the ambiguity, I think, because there is no full closure here, right? It's not tidy with a bow, right? I mean, Arvin, who knows what's going to happen, but he's never going to see his grandma and his uncle again. His sister's dead. His parents are dead, right? So, yeah, Bodecker, he got justice, maybe.
Yeah.
Right? But, you know, it's momentary, I guess, right? It's just a moment of justice. And then there's still Arvin, and there's, to me, still with that open ending or ambiguous ending, there's still, for me, a lot of sadness there. Because a kid that has gone through so much like that and did get that sense of family, right? I mean, what family does he have now?
Right.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I think the ending, I bought that he's earned some quiet. And again, for me, it was that ceremony of burying the dog, perhaps. But also it was terrified me that he starts talking about enlisting in Vietnam. I mean, on one level, this is a film about two wars, right? And America in between them. And he doesn't seem happy about it, but he's kind of like, well, it's what I'm good at. And to me, that's such a strange, horrifying thing that we are often relegated to the things we're forced to become good at, right?
Yeah.
Were there other comments or questions?
Yeah, Deborah said that sacrifice is a theme that's well honored in Appalachia.
I think that's great. Again, I would ask her maybe if she can pop back in. Do you feel like the notion of sacrifice was treated well in the movie? Was it a theme that sort of gets played out in thoughtful ways?
Yeah, I mean, it talks about that and ties it to religion, right? I mean, and that's where it motivates Willard to sacrifice to help save Charlotte. But I just think with Appalachian culture, there's a bigger, I think, theme of sacrifice. I think that sometimes within Appalachia, right, you sacrifice yourself to stay near your family, right? There's a tug of war there. Yeah. I mean, just personal story, that was something that I struggled with when I went to Texas to go get my doctorate at Baylor, of leaving my family, right? That was a sacrifice, but it was a sacrifice I was willing to make. Some people aren't willing to make that sacrifice to leave their family because really, some aren't fortunate enough to have, other support systems available. They are part of that support system, right with their family. So, yeah, I mean, I think that, sacrifice is a theme. I agree with that comment from Deborah. And I thought it did an adequate job. Anyway.
Well, it's interesting. I think there's two very competing ideas of sacrifice. One is the type you're talking about, where I'm going to go to work every day, or I'm going to give up comfort to sort of better myself, or I'm going to do something I don't want to do for the sake of someone else. So there's those really honorable sacrifices. And then there's the big symbolic sacrifices. I'm going to sacrifice my wife, right? I'm going to sacrifice this dog. And I don't have any sort of response to that other than it makes me think a lot. It really makes me wonder.
Jay added to that death seemed to be a saving grace for each character, whether they wanted to die or not, especially with the shots that only showed the tops of the trees with the sky in the background.
That's a really beautiful comment. Especially, usually in film, when we see the sky, there's a liberation, there's freedom. We get to, it's sort of, I don't know if it's subconscious, whatever. We always think of the soul floating away when we finally get to see the sky. But it is actually a really great comment. A lot of these characters have, what do you want to say? They've lived lives of, I was almost saying quiet desperation, not very quiet. But they live lives where they've trapped themselves in a way, like, hey, I performed that violence, or, well, I have this many photographs of my wife having sex, and then, with corpses, or not with, photographs with corpses. I just killed a preacher. What do I do? So it almost feels like they live lives where they're not allowed to go back, right? So that death would seem to be a release or a natural progression from that. I want to say one more thing about sacrifice before we jump into the next question, because I say this to my students a lot, and I want to take this opportunity to do so. We see these huge images of sacrifice in the film, right? But I think the film also honors small moments of sacrifice. You know what I mean? And I think for our students, I say it all the time. They're like, well, what am I sacrificing? You're here. You're spending 40, 50 hours a week reading, writing, thinking, struggling. And that is what we need of you. That's the sacrifice the community wants of you, et cetera. So thank you for doing that. But I'm sorry to make it about my students. But
Sarah adds to the question of sacrifice by saying, can you discuss the dichotomy surrounding blood in the film, as in religious themes in Appalachian Christianity, such as power in the blood, saved by the blood of Christ, juxtaposed with the blood resulting from killings, violence, fights, etc.?
I have a very specific answer, but do you want to?
Well, that makes me think of, in the book, that's one thing about the prayer log and the sacrifice that Willard does make. There's a lot more than Jack, right? I mean, there's many killings of animals and splashing the blood on the prayer log itself to sacrifice. So, he was doing his best to be washed by the blood. I think that for Charlotte to be washed by the blood and be saved. But that's an interesting comment question.
I'll give a, sorry, is there more to that?
Leslie also brought up the fact that it seems like the Marine was tortured like it was an act of war to spread fear.
That seems definitely true, I think. And I do think that relates. Remember, I think one of the things the Gothic does is it confuses things. It doesn't give you a clear answer. So my favorite part of the movie, because I don't know how to respond to it, and it responds to this blood question, is when he eats the pie. Right, there's the pie that a neighbor left right on the porch, and he just goes and eats the whole darn thing. And what does everyone wonder? Is that blood? Whose blood is that? So if you have this confusing language of phrases like the body and blood of Christ, and you're supposed to take this into you, and that's a communion. On one level, he's trying to commune, maybe with his version of God, or maybe with his family, or maybe, and this is where I think it's really confusing, Is he just being a selfish kid who is just so wounded? He wants something sweet, something good, something his. So when he goes, and bear with me just for a second, when he goes and he eats that pie and it covers everywhere, it's such a hedonistic act. Or is it a type of sacrifice, a religious act, a spiritual act? I think that the film doesn't give us an easy way out. And the film is asking us to say, perhaps many of these characters think that they are expiating, if we know that term, that Christian term, that they're expiating by murdering people, they're expiating by punishing people. That the pie moment should make us always question, is that sanctified blood, or is that the use of religion to deal with your own emotional problems and your own violence?
Yeah, and I think poor Arvin probably didn't have a decent meal for a while with his mom being sick, to be honest with you. But no, I think that with just coming from his mom's funeral, and that is a very Appalachian thing. It's part of Appalachian culture of people. I remember when my grandparents died when I was, in my teens. You get more food than you can ever, use, really. I mean, people just, it's an outpouring, and that's what they feel that they can do best to show their sympathy and their care for you. Yeah. So that pie there, I was just like, man, that really hits home. But yeah, and I think he did. I agree with you. I think coming from his mom's funeral and, the way his dad is acting post that funeral, right, or after that funeral, he wanted something sweet, right? He wanted some pleasure in his life at that moment.
And it's also a rejection of his father. His father's like, let's go. Right. And he takes the pie and goes in. So there's, again, I could spend a lot of time on this. The pie perhaps representing America? No, I want my version of America. You know what I mean? I don't want your version of America anymore. I'm going to go this way. I'm going to reject the father. And that might mean many, many things in that scene. Please.
Deborah asked the question, what about the absence of education in the film? We never see the inside of the school building. Arvin and Lenora seem too poor to fit into their educational landscape. Their education, perhaps their way out, seems sacrificed in a way. What other options does Arvin have than them?
You're going to make me go there, aren't you, Deborah? Yeah, I'll go there. I think I have to put my pen and the paper down. I think one of the things that happens in the film is it is suggesting the lack of a traditional education can be a beautiful thing. Yes, I just said that as a college professor, because it can open up your mind and your imagination to things that might not be appropriate for a classroom, and they might get weeded out of you. So I think there's a wildness to the imagination. However, as we all know, being democratic citizens, I don't mean Democrat, I mean democratic citizens, that the liberation of imagination, too much imagination, when applied to morality, when applied to ethics, can be dangerous. Because when you think about Roy, his imagination was so great, if I kill my wife, I'm going to have the power to bring him back. I've read the Quran, I've read the Torah, I've read the Bible. I don't know anything in any of those texts that says I, a normal person, can pull that off. And so the fact that Roy isn't educated traditionally, doesn't seem to have a college degree, might not have ever read the Bible, if we're going in that realm. We have no evidence that he can read. He uses this, on one level, cool, beautiful, wild, desperate imagination to do something, I mean, almost just unspeakably damaging. And so for me, if we can combine those two things in education, and I'm going to talk about this with Arvin in a second, combine the wild imagination that you might retain in the woods, if you will, or just not in schoolrooms, and bring that with you to learn more about history, to read actual documents and texts, instead of, let's face it, how many people imagine that they know what so-and-so thinks and feels? They imagine what they know, what someone in history, I'll be very vague here, what someone in history thought or felt. But then, because I do this in my classes, let's actually go read that historical figure. They're like, this isn't so. Yes, it is. That's actually his writing. Can we think about that? So when you talk about what does that leave Arvin in my most hopeful way, well, he goes to Vietnam, comes back, uses the GI Bill, and comes to OUC. I'm not joking about that at all. No. And if I can be a little, I'm so sorry, I talked a lot very quickly. No. When I interviewed for my job here about 6 years ago, there was a vet in that class. I was teaching a class, and I won't use his name, but if he's out there, dude, I think about you all the time. And I was teaching a poem about the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in DC. So we were talking about these issues, and his analysis of that poem, I will never forget. And I won't bore everybody here. My point is, that's a person who never, whether his experience in war brought back some of that wild imagination or he never left it, it's one of the most important things that we need in traditional education right now. So I hope, that's my hope for Arvin.
Leslie asked the question, I noticed there were no long-haired types in the film, given the historical setting until the end.
Yeah.
Was there any significance to this?
I think that's, the film is trying very hard to tell the story of the years between World War II and Nam, the conflict in Vietnam. So for me, that was historical. It was, all right, he's grown up now. He's out of the 50s, takes place in 57, right? So the 50s are ending. Here comes in the 60s. Here's that wildness. Here's that liberated lifestyle. Here's somebody who perhaps either fully rejected their father, if you will, or didn't have one, and this is the lifestyle they chose. Notice that we get multiple unmarried people in that car. The rest of this film is about who marries who, right? It's almost like the end of Harry Potter. Sorry if that really angered Donald to compare his work with that, but and nothing wrong with Harry Potter. Now I just stepped into it because there's a whole controversy about J.K. Rowling. We're going to walk away from that now. There it is. Bye. But the idea that this is about marriage, the first 20 minutes of the movie are so-and-so married so-and-so, and so-and-so married so-and-so, and all of this sort of stuff. So to end with a car full of long-haired hippies who don't seem to be married, but seem to be sexually active and motivated, I do think that's a sign of maybe not something better or something worse, but certainly a different era coming in.
Sarah made the comment, I thought there was a haunting image of trying to resurrect the young woman who was killed in the woods with a screwdriver, and believing that he could carry out the action of violence and give back life if he asked God to give back life in his lack of power. That was unsettling for me and the hardest thing for me to watch, because I see connections often in Appalachia to smaller, less violent issues or decisions. People believing that they have the power to solve problems that are deeper than what they seem.
I'd just like to add to that, Sarah, because that's very well said. It's usually displaced. I'm going to fix that problem over there, and if I can do that, somehow this problem of mine is going to go away. And I don't think it's conscious, right? I think you're mentioning that, right? And if you went and talked to somebody about it, right, because that's one thing that we have a hard time doing, is talking about our feelings, our actions, our behaviors, our beliefs publicly, because let's face it, we're online right now, right? It's so hard to speak online and not have someone angry with you, frustrated with you from some point of view or other. And I'll just be blunt. I feel like Roy, that's the person you're talking about, Roy and Helen, Roy could preach, he could deliver, but Roy couldn't talk. Notice that, where does Roy spend half the movie? In a closet. And part of you could say, well, he's in a closet because, you know, his face was wounded by the spider. He didn't want to show himself to his wife, or he was embarrassed. Another way to read that is, he simply does not have the tools to actually talk to family, to talk to friends about his beliefs. Because let's face it, his belief got shaken. I pour spiders on myself and God loves me, so I'm not going to get bit. And then he gets bit. That does not have to mean I'm wrong. That doesn't have to mean God doesn't love me. That doesn't have to mean those things. But a conversation with, I don't know, say your wife, about what she thinks that means, and actually open up that way, I think would solve a lot of the issues you mentioned here about this displaced belief in things that seem impossible. And notice, yes, Roy dies later, but notice that it's Helen who dies because of Roy's inability to communicate, talk, figure out his actual feelings and thoughts and his beliefs.
Leslie had a follow-up question to the question before prior. I suppose I was thinking of the anti-war connection with the long-haired types than necessarily what you mentioned. Does the war not, or does the film not make a specific comment on violence?
I think it makes many comments on violence. I think it talks about violence as byproducts of the world in which you live. I think it mentions violence as ethics in a way. I'm not saying it's good or bad, but I think the film does ask us to consider that. I certainly think that the film, how do I say this? Because you're asking specifically about war. So I'll go there. Some people in the film seem to believe that a justified war exists and you can fight a justified war, therefore violence in a justified war is moral. But I think the film seems, for me, my reading is the film leans the opposite way. The film seems to say, it doesn't matter if you're a kid with a baseball bat or an entire army in another country, war always is going to be crossing an ethical boundary that perhaps you shouldn't cross. Yeah.
Deborah makes a point on a lighter note, shout out to Schlegel's in the film. Love that bar and mirror in the deli and quote unquote need. Heard the film crew scouted Chillicothe at one point and stopped at Schlegel's. Just a fun tidbit.
Was Schlegel's in the movie?
No, it's just
Okay, I was gonna be like
inspiration for the restaurant.
I didn't.
Where Charlotte and Sandy worked. I think that's what you're talking about. Yeah.
I'm just smiling. When I moved to
Yeah.
Chillicothe, I went to Schlegel's almost every day and still go as often
There's
as I
a
can.
huge mirror behind the coffee.
Oh, I didn't pick up on that. I should have.
Yeah.
Another question, which ending did you personally prefer, the book or the movie, and why?
I like the book because it was more ambiguous. There's suggestions, right, in the movie. And even I read something that, that could be Charles Manson that picked him up, right? So that's something that I did not think of when I saw the movie. But yeah, I mean, in the book, it's just, Arvin's looking for Route 50 and hoping someone gives him a ride. In the movie, right, he actually gets the ride and is glad. And, takes me back, circle back what Tony said, right? I mean, that he did deserve that moment of quiet and peace and to rest for a little bit.
Yeah, I think he actually earned it.
Right.
I think he did the one ritual that no one else in that movie did, which is dealt with his feelings, buried them, negotiated them. Are there other questions?
So Sarah made the comment, and this kind of gets to another question. Sarah made the comment, my son loved that dog, so you have to save my wife, as being a quote that she brought out of the movie. Another quote was by Deborah, some people are born just to be buried. So our question for you is, in the film, what are some of your favorite lines?
It was literally going to be my next question to you.
Yeah, I think that one, that's one thing that could be a tagline for the movie. Some people are born just to be buried, right? And not even just some people, some things, right? If the innocence of Jack, when you think about it, the dog. So yeah, that was a great quote. And I go back to the joke. I mean, I was very happy to hear that, and just that play on words. And then, Willard, after beating the hell out of those two guys, it gets that moment of levity, and then, yeah, I think I'm going to buy you a candy bar.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, those two are definitely my favorite.
I'll go to the horrifying thing I've been avoiding all night. I love the voiceover. I could listen to the voiceover by itself. And the one line, especially, and I forget who asked the question, so please forgive me, who was kind of asking, is there a moral center of the film? Is there a way to think about things? I think the one bit of moral center we get is we get a description of Carl. And it's about when Carl takes those photographs of dead men he killed with his naked wife, and we get those shots of the negatives later on in the film where he's haunted by them, quite literally this other world. That was the closest he could get to God, feeling like something mattered. And that those sentences haunted me. And then the next sentence, and it's my favorite line in the movie, I won't say it out loud, it's Donald Ray Pollock's voice just saying, that sick F.
Yeah.
And I was like, thank you. I felt so relieved that this voice was giving me an ethical center for a second. To say, okay, that's too far. That's a sick way to think. But the funny part is, right, that the joke is the voice that said that is the voice that thought of it and wrote it. Right. And so I want to honor Donald Ray Pollock in that way to say, that's the joke, right? So that sick is also in part perhaps a little psychoanalysis of the author himself, and kind of laugh with it. Maybe that's how you deal with such images and such ideas, is you write them, you think about them, you present them, you share them with others so that we can actually grapple as a culture and a community.
Another question was, can you think of other Gothic novels that are similar to The Devil All the Time that you might recommend, or films?
Quite a few, actually. Anything come to mind? Because you were just finishing reading the novel.
Well, I would say just to read all of Don Pollock's work, right? If you haven't read Knock 'em Stiff, read that. You'll get, you'll recognize bits, right? I mean, you recognize the town, of course. And I'm into reading The Heavenly Table, his second novel. So there's some common themes in there too. It seems to me, I'm not deep into it, that expansive. It's more expansive in The Heavenly Table than it is. I mean, there's pretty wide range, right? Even in The Devil All the Time. But I'll leave that to you with the scholar of literature and film.
I'll throw out a bunch of words. If you want traditional sort of literature that seems to maybe inspire or at least play in the same world, Flannery O'Connor is the biggest name that comes to mind. She's writing about the Southern Gothic all the time. William Faulkner, the style is different, but he's dealing with very similar notions, attitudes, ideas, opinions, and actions and behaviors. I'll even throw out Shirley Jackson, who's a very different writer, but in terms of, if you like the tone, semi-comedic, really dark, never quite sure if you're supposed to laugh or be terrified, I think there's a companionship there. I'm always worried about films in Appalachia because I think that sometimes they just exploit it. To be totally blunt, I think that they just put things so over the top and there's not that sense of reality. It's almost like, let's make an entertainment out of other people's pain or something like that. So I'm a little more hesitant to talk about films that function that way. Feel free to email me, vinci@ohio.edu, Da Vinci without the duh, and I'm happy to sort of talk about other specific films.
No, you mentioned that just real quick, but because you're right, it seems like the twang in other Appalachian films is more severe. It's more exaggerated, I would say. It's very exaggerated. This one, other than Robert Pattinson, but I thought it was pretty true. I mean, even for a Swedish guy, right, Willard, his was pretty true, right? So I didn't feel like it was too exaggerated like we do see in other films. So.
Absolutely, yeah. Well,
I think that's all the questions in the comments.
I want to thank Dr. Dywayne nicely for setting this up. I want to thank all of you who actually came and watched. And if you're watching this in the future, welcome. Thank you for being here with us. And I want to give a quick sort of shout out to OUC in general, Ohio University Chillicothe. We're just talking, because we're in the middle of the COVID crisis, and hopefully not in the middle of, hopefully more than that. But many of them, I have not been on this campus for a while. I'm teaching remotely from Zoom, and at the moment I get to sort of sit here. And this really is a beautiful, magical little place. I don't know if anyone's ever seen Lilo and Stitch. There's a beautiful line where he says, "It's my family. It's small and broken. It's small and broken, but it's real and it's mine, and I found it all on my own." And there's something beautiful about that here. And I mention that because I typically do film festivals every semester. And we're going to, it sounds like, if I understand what I'm allowed to do, the next time we do something like this, it's actually going to be in the basement of Bennett Hall, back in the auditorium, and hopefully, possibly around Halloween. So please be on the lookout for a similar event that might be streamed, or you might actually be able to come on down and socially distance, but have a conversation like this and actually watch a movie together.
Yeah, and I am very happy to have other people on campus. It's been a long 6 months.
Yeah.
We miss people like Tony, Craig, our producer, communication specialist that's behind the laptop that you guys can't see, and then was shouting out the questions and the comments to us. We miss you guys, the students especially, so much being on campus. So these little events that we can have now and be safe and do them, we want to try. I mean, that's the one thing about the pandemic, right? And there's one thing that I've read recently and watched a video on. I think it's a Geek Squad founder, right? He said disruption forces innovation. So this creative type thing that we're trying to do here, just to have some events on campus, and we're so glad that you joined us tonight. But we can't wait till we can have these things in more full force on campus when it's safe to do so.
We would also like to encourage our audience to fill out the online survey that you received the link for. This helps us in planning future events.
Right. I think I have to, in our last few minutes here, give a shout out to Dr. Vina Kazbaker and Dr. Ron Salamoni. These were some of Donald Ray Pollock's professors when he was here. So I want to make sure that they get some honor here.
And Ron still talks to Don regularly.
Right.
So.
And they both hired me, so blame them for anything I said.
Right. So again, thanks for joining us. And yeah, like Craig mentioned there, and the voiceover, his voiceover, the narrator tonight. Yeah, fill out that survey and let us know what you thought of it. You know, we can take hits and praise just the same. So we'd be happy to hear your thoughts, and you know, it'll help us with future events. So take care and have a good night.